All right, so Dispatch has been out for several weeks now, and the beautiful thing about it is now we are learning more and more and more about the game because the devs can obviously talk about all of the episodes. They're not worried about spoilers or whatever. And one thing that's been really interesting is to see and hear their reaction about the online discourse and the factor that played into the game and into how people perceive certain characters or certain things that they, to be honest, didn't expect, because you can't test with game testers what online discourse will be. And it's really, really interesting. And so I wanted to dive into it. And specifically, there's one character in particular that was deeply affected by online discourse, and that is Blonde Blazer. That how people perceived her completely changed from any of their game testing, from any of how their game testers perceived her. That when all this discourse was happening, it completely shifted the character. And so I want to dive into it with you. So this quote is coming from one of the game developers themselves when they were being interviewed about the game, and specifically what the reaction was to the online buzz and seeing fan theories, all the different stuff. And so this is the quote. They said, "The Blonde Blazer controversy was a thing that we definitely were not expecting. It brought a weird life to a whole different part of the game. No one could have predicted that people were going to see the Blonde Blazer character and think that she did not have true intentions. She's always been this pure-hearted character to us, and so as developers, we were heartbroken." End quote. And so this is one quote. I've seen a few where they've talked about this, but essentially, if you weren't online during this, many people, myself included, were making all kinds of theory videos and discussion and all of this different stuff, and there was a lot of buzz around Blonde Blazer. A lot of people thought that there was evidence that maybe she was working for Shroud, maybe she was the daughter of Shroud, maybe she had ill intentions. One big point that the developers never saw coming was when there was the Phenomenon reveal that she was indeed dating Phenomenon after the second episode and he appears. That a lot of people were bothered, where it's like, oh, she seemed to be flirting with Robert, but she's already in a relationship, and depending on her decisions, they would have kissed, whatever. And so a lot of people then were like, ooh, she's not a good person. She's not a pure-hearted person. How could she do that to poor old Phenomenon? And then along with that, there was all the villain theories of why was she trying to not have the group go and steal the Astral Pulse? Why did she suddenly show up after Mecha Man was defeated and was down and out? And so there was all this buzz being like, Blonde Blazer's not a trustworthy person. And the developers didn't expect this at all. The developers actually, in their game tests, all of the decisions, they wanted to make them hard enough that you would have a pretty close to 50-50 split. And for all of their game testers, that turned out to be the case, including the love interest thing. And of course, we know the vast majority of people actually ended up with Invisigal over Blonde Blazer. And a large part of that was due to this online discourse, that people were seeing things, reading into things that completely changed how people would have perceived the character if it wasn't for that. I find that really interesting about how an online community can shift how people feel about something. And that's a good way to measure it, because when people who were testing the game didn't have that kind of community to have theories and to read into things and to have that kind of discourse, when that wasn't happening, a lot of people were still choosing Blonde Blazer. But as soon as that began to happen online, it completely changed how people perceive the character. I find that to be really interesting and fascinating. I think the same thing happened with Invisigal, that most people actually immediately forgave Invisigal for betraying Robert at the very beginning, when she's the one who actually plants the bomb on Mecha Man's suit that explodes. That most people chose to forgive her, which I actually really strongly think only happened because a lot of people already thought that she probably was there at the very beginning and was the person who planted the bomb. Because again, there was this huge fan theory that when Toxic says, "Hey babe, get out of there," that was Invisigal, and that she was there and was the person who planted the bomb on Robert. That's why his suit didn't detect someone planting the bomb, is because she was invisible. It turns out that was true, and I think because people had time to process that when it was revealed, it wasn't as shocking, because you're like, oh yeah, okay, and people immediately already had processed their emotions to forgive her immediately. Because even if you forgive her, she says, like, how could you forgive me? You haven't even had time to process this. But the irony was that actually many of us did have the time to process what if that was the case. And I think that's why there's such a disproportionate amount of players who did end up forgiving her, because I think it actually would have been more divisive without that. But all in all, as much as it's kind of lame that sometimes online discourse can shift and perceive how we see a character or see a story, where you can read into things that aren't actually real, that the developers never intended, that Blonde Blazer was always intended to be this pure-hearted, happy-go-lucky, kind of dorky character, and people just really read into that of like, there's no way she's that good, there's no way that she actually cares, there's no way there's got to be more to the story. The sad thing about losing that is that you lose some of that stuff, but I think the benefit of the online discourse still outweighs it. Like, part of the fun of this game was the fan theories, was the community building, was people getting online being like, what do you think's going to happen? What about this? What about this? Like, that community stuff was so much fun. It's sad when you have an experience like that. It's got to be weird and disorienting as a developer, where a character you make people are reading into and you're like, no, you guys are wrong. She's just a good person. But that's part of the beauty of it. And it was part of the fun of Dispatch. It makes me wonder too, in negative aspects, I really strongly think, and I don't have any way to fully prove this, but for The Last of Us Part 2, it was a hugely controversial game. And I think a lot of it had to do with that it was released during the peak of COVID, when everybody was isolated and there was all of this online discourse. Because, and I have no way to prove this because you can't do a big enough statistic, but all of the people that I talked to who aren't heavily online, who played the game, either liked or loved the story, where they either felt like, oh, it was good, wasn't as good as the first one, or they felt like, no, this was just as good as the first one. And the people I know who are actually very much online had their views often leaning towards the negative. Like, no, there's all these holes, there's all these plot things, doesn't make sense, can't believe they would do this. And so it's interesting just to notice stuff like that, of how online communities can shift and change how people see a story, how people see a character. I just think it's really, really interesting. But I want to know what you guys think, so head down to the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts. What were your thoughts on the developers saying that they didn't see coming in any of their playtests? People assuming that Blonde Blazer wasn't just a really good person who had Robert's best interest in mind. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on online discourse? Do you think it helps games? Do you think it helps fandoms? Or do you think at times it hurts fandoms and it hurts characters and it hurts the story that developers were hoping people could experience? Let me know in the comment section down below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that junk, and I will see you guys in the next one.